Hello, it's Wednesday, March 31st, and welcome to The Path Toward Fully Autonomous Trucks, a Fleet Owner Magazine webinar. I'm Mindy Long, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this event. Before we begin, I'd like to explain how you can participate in today's webcast. If you experience any audio difficulties or trouble with advancing the slides, please press the F5 key to refresh your screen. You should also see a toolbar at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to open and close several widgets. You can customize your screen, moving windows around by dragging the title bar or resizing your windows by clicking on the lower right corner of any window. We have allotted time for questions and answers. Type your question into the box on your screen at any time and click Submit. We'll answer as many as possible following the presentation. If we don't get to all of the questions today, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Today's presentation is made possible by PrePass Safety Alliance, the provider of PrePass, the leading way station bypass and safety data platform in North America. Other services include driver alerts, electronic toll payments, and informed safety and tolling software. From adaptive smart cruise control to fully self-driving vehicles, advanced technology will play a critical role in the future of transportation. Talk in the trucking industry about fully autonomous trucks has been going on for several years, but the timeline remains in question. Many are wondering if we really are any closer to truly seeing trucks without drivers and why it is taking so long for autonomous trucks to become a reality. Today we have two experts, Jack Roberts and Mark Doughty, who will provide a real-world perspective about the future of autonomous trucks and share their insights into the steady evolution of autonomous truck development and when fleets should expect to deploy autonomous technology in their fleet operations. Roberts is a trucking journalist who has been covering the North American trucking industry for more than 25 years. As a leading authority on emerging technology and a licensed commercial driver, Roberts covers a wide range of industry issues, including autonomous vehicles, electric vans and trucks, blockchain, digitized freight, and modern vehicle maintenance trends. Doughty serves as the President and Chief Executive Officer of PrePass Safety Alliance. He also serves on the Board of Directors and Executive Committee of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America and on its Executive Committee. He serves as the Arizona Trucking Association's he serves on the Arizona Trucking Association's Board of Directors and on the Executive Committee. Now I will turn it over to Jack. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Mindy. Hello, everyone. Thank you to PrePass for hosting this webinar today. And we are going to talk about autonomous trucks, the likely timeline for their adoption, and the fact that things haven't happened quite as quickly as we were promised. And so the opening slide you see here is the Freightliner Inspiration Truck. And this was the sort of shot across the bow, the detonation in 2015 that woke the industry up to the possibility that self-driving trucks were coming their way and in a fairly short order of time. And so real quickly, from a very high level, what is an autonomous truck? It is obviously a self-driving vehicle that uses autonomous control systems fully integrated with external sensors such as LiDAR, GPS tracking systems, radar, camera systems to guide the truck down the road in perfectly legal speeds and merge in and out of traffic on and off highways, totally under its own control. And as you would imagine, when the possibility of self-driving trucks became apparent, the industry was all abuzz. You know, what will happen to drivers? When are we going to get these trucks? What are they going to cost? And at the time, we were told a likely time frame for adoption. And again, this was in 2015. And the truck, as me and many other journalists witnessed that night, drove itself across Hoover Dam just fine. We went out for a ride in the vehicle the next day, and I actually sat behind the wheel of this truck as it drove itself through Las Vegas traffic, and it was a mind-blowing experience to sit there at the wheel of a truck and not do a thing while it perfectly navigated and negotiated traffic. And so at the time, it seemed very reasonable to say that, well, we'll see these in 5 or 6 years, and that obviously has not happened. So what's going on? Well, obviously, it's harder than we thought, and that's not me saying that. That's John Krapsik, and he's the CEO of Waymo, which is a descendant of Google's self-driving vehicle division. It's gone through many, many legal incarnations and mergers, far too numerous to list here, but he said something very interesting. About a month ago, he was asked about this, and he said, I would say it's a bigger challenge than launching a rocket and putting it in orbit around the Earth, because it has to be done safely over and over again. And so there are a lot of more challenges out there than a lot of the developers initially anticipated when they first premiered self-driving trucks. And so real quickly, let's go through what some of those are. First of all, computers, I think we all know, they really like predictability. They like to be able to understand, see what's going on. They like repetitive tasks. They don't like a lot of variables. They like to have things, I guess you would say, in a very manageable sort of state. Unfortunately, when humans enter into the equation, that's not what computers get. Instead, they get a very chaotic, dynamic, constantly changing environment. In fact, there are, from time to time, very well publicized accidents with autonomous vehicles. But what kind of gets lost in the headlines is that in almost every incident, the autonomous vehicle was not at fault. It was usually human error. A great example is that when a self-driving car truck pulls up to a stop sign, that vehicle is going to stop, and it is going to wait there for a preset period of time while its external cameras take a look around, make sure everything's good to go before it proceeds on through the stop sign. This is in sharp contrast with a lot of human drivers, and I regret to tell you I'm one of them from time to time, who does what my father used to call a Hollywood stop, just kind of roll up to the stop sign and cruise on through. So usually, one of the initial problems with autonomous vehicles and interacting with humans is the computers assume that the humans are going to do what they're supposed to, and as we all know, humans don't always do what they are supposed to. There have been some other issues that are going on as well. Public perception is something of a problem with autonomous vehicles, in that the driving public and the public at large really doesn't know what to make of self-driving vehicles at the moment, and there's great concern about the safety, the viability of these vehicles. We're also seeing a fairly significant legislative lag as well. In other words, the laws coming out of state and local governments are not keeping pace with the autonomous technology that we're seeing. There are a few examples. Arizona in particular has been pretty good. Some of the southwestern states are actively trying to attract some of the R&D companies, the startups that are developing this technology. So they've been a little bit more proactive. But all in all, I would say, generally speaking, in any state in the country, we're just really not prepared from a legislative/legal point of view for the advent of autonomous vehicles in large numbers on the road. So obviously that is going to have to mature over time as well. Now, there's going to be a few things on the tech side that we're really waiting on to kind of push autonomous development into high gear. The biggest one is going to be vehicle-to-vehicle communication, commonly abbreviated as V2V. And this is the big one. This is the one where all the cars on any given stretch of road electronically talk to one another using cellular connections, Wi-Fi connections. And what this does is this aids the computer greatly. If you remember a few minutes ago, I talked about predictivity. The computers on the autonomous vehicles, when they know for sure what the vehicles around them are going to do, intend to do within the next mile, half mile, 5 miles, it makes their task a lot easier. And I don't know when it's going to happen, but at some point there will be a tipping point out there where there will be enough cars on the road with any given autonomous truck to begin to really aid it as it's going down the highway and help it progress safely and smoothly. But there are some other additional issues here that Mark is going to comment on right now.
So thank you, Jack, and again, thank you to all of our participants today for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in the webinar. So when you look at all of these wonderful yellow circles around the vehicles, it looks like the concept should be simple, right? Vehicles talking to vehicles. What can be so hard? Well, believe it or not, there was some really, really good thought that went into this, and it dates back to about 1999. And at that point in time, there was what's referred to as the safety spectrum, or also known as 5.9, and it was set aside and reserved for dedicated short-range communication to enable this V2X activity and V2V activity to take place. Unfortunately, as we've seen, there has been an acceleration in the advancement of technologies, but it's been of recent. And as Jack pointed out in an earlier slide with the Cascadia truck, we really started to see these things back around 2015. Well, this particular spectrum lies under the Federal Communications Commission, and industry and developers and academia have been asking for the FCC for quite some time to actually provide guidance in terms of how this spectrum is going to be allocated and used. And there's 75 megahertz in the spectrum. And unfortunately, the FCC did not provide any real guidance. And it put a lot of folks in kind of the old, and I'll date myself, back to VCRs. Do you choose VHS or do you choose Betamax? And if you bet wrong, how much money are you spending to develop technology for your vehicles that may be obsolete if the FCC weighs in a different direction? Ultimately, Toyota took an advancing position and said, we're going to move forward with DSRC. At that point, the competition from a technological perspective that was out there is what we now see as 5G. And the FCC pushed back on Toyota and said, hey, we don't want you guys to go down this road just yet. So to cut to the end of the story, back in November of this past year, the FCC ruled that they were going to reallocate 45 of the 75 megahertz to unlicensed devices. More commonly, what we would use is Wi-Fi. So what would have been an advancing technology now is again up in limbo. And it's not that the technology is not there and able to move this V2V activity forward. It's absent the guidance, and Jack had spoke a little bit about that if we don't have guidance and surety, there's an unwillingness for people to dump tons of money into the components that are necessary to have our vehicles communicating. And then another thing that stands out is what can be done in the existing 30 megahertz. So industry and researchers at this point are looking at that, trying to identify how can this V2V take place and take place successfully. There are some concerns about cross interference from adjoining bands and things of that nature. But even if we move beyond that, then comes the question of how do you future-proof and have backwards compatibility? So just because we have 5G today, and I'll tell you an interesting thing on that naming nomenclature, 5G is not an actual technical standard. It stands for fifth generation, just like 4G and 3G were each respective different generations. So when we look at this and we say, okay, if a vehicle is now in a V2V environment and it is becoming 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, how do the new ones communicate? So as you can see, there's a lot of challenges that are out there, and there definitely needs to be some regulatory involvement in order to set the stage so that this can advance in ways that the OEMs can move their products and services along. Jack?
All right. Thank you, Mark. And I would, for the record, like to note that we were a VHS family, although that was just pure luck. My dad had no idea. So, look, another technology that's going to be critical, well, actually two, which also tie in a very obvious way with V2V communication, is V2I and Smart Infrastructure. And what we're talking about here is vehicle to infrastructure and quote-unquote intelligent infrastructure items around the vehicle. So let me paint a picture for you here. Imagine, again, now that we're at a certain tipping point where every vehicle on a given stretch of road is communicating with each other and giving the other vehicle some idea as to its intent, destination, lane changes, that sort of thing. Now imagine that their operating environment has been bolstered even further by, say, an invisible lighthouse beacon coming from, say, a bridge overpass, which tells the computers, the radar systems, hey, I'm a bridge overpass. I'm made of concrete. Do not crash into me. That is an enormously helpful aid for the autonomous driving systems on board the vehicles. Imagine now, and to take it a step further, imagine traffic lights. Imagine if traffic lights were smart and they were monitoring traffic flow in real time. And they were able to note that, say, it's rush hour, and they realize now that traffic flow east to west has picked up by 32% in the last 10 minutes. And so they can start holding their green cycles east and west, with green lights green longer, to allow the flow of vehicles to expedite through the area. And they can reverse that procedure in the morning when it's rush hour. Now you begin to see, I often tell people I imagine this as those 1940s water dancing movies where you'd see all the people in the pool and they were all perfectly synchronized. That's kind of what we start talking about now. And you really begin to see why the OEMs and the startup companies really start to talk about autonomous vehicle technology as a serious tool that can not only solve issues like the driver shortage, which is primarily the number one issue they sort of cite when they're asked why they're developing this technology, but it can really become a valuable tool for getting vehicles through highly congested areas, Atlanta, Seattle, Chicago. We all know where these congested areas are. And so when you start to sort of realize how all of these systems and these technologies will integrate, and how an autonomous vehicle will be able to take advantage of them and use the information coming in from all these sources as it navigates down the road, you begin to really appreciate the really, I mean, massive disruptive potential. Maybe disruptive in this case is the wrong word, but it could be a transformative technology for the trucking industry. And Mark, I think you were going to add a little commentary here on these technologies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this piggybacks a little bit on what I was talking about in our previous slide on the communication. You know, as Jack was alluding to, the level of engagement so that these vehicles can flow through traffic situations seamlessly is incredibly important. And that's where the whole connected vehicle concept comes into play. But one of the concerns that exists is in that 30 megahertz that's now been allocated out of the 5.9 spectrum, we should still be able to have a lot of advancement in this area, but some of the areas that there's going to be vulnerability that were targeted for significant improvement is around vulnerable road users and pedestrian safety measures. So as Jack was talking about, being able to see what's coming, and that also includes pedestrians. And if you have somebody on a bicycle that you're approaching and they're coming from your right and you cannot yet see them, having your vehicle signal that danger or impending danger may be there. Or if somebody's crossing the crosswalk so that the automatic emergency braking system is triggered, or that the vehicle is automatically slowed down, and in order to allow that individual to proceed and cross safely and have that assurance that the vehicle is monitored and is not going to hit them. So unfortunately in this space, these are some new challenges given the limited bandwidth. Will they be worked out? I think they will. But it just became a little bit more complex because when you look at it in our terms and say, hey, if I've got a 5-lane freeway and it's now been brought down to 2 lanes and I still need to have the same throughput, obviously we can all recognize the challenges in our daily lives in trucking. That's somewhat of a parallel that the technologists are going to have to overcome with the 5.9 spectrum being reallocated. Can we get there? Absolutely. It's just another setback that we're working through at this point.
All right. Well, the big issue, I think, with autonomous trucks, since we've started talking about them as an industry, a society, a country, has been drivers. And people say, well, what about the drivers? And if you look at various studies around the country, truck driving has sort of become the #1 occupation in a great majority of our states today. And so what's going to happen to all these people? Are they going to be put out of a job? Are robot trucks just going to suddenly take over and begin endlessly roaming our highways 24/7, delivering goods? Yes, at some point we are going to see a large degree, I think, of autonomous vehicles, but we are still a very long way out from that. And even, I think, when autonomous technology enters the realm of sort of everyday use and it's an accepted, proven fleet operational tool, it's just my belief as a CDL holder and someone who's been covering this industry for over a quarter of a century that there are still going to be a fairly wide range of applications out there that are going to require a human being on board a truck. Now, I've said for years that there are little children out there who are sitting in the family minivan, or in my case as a kid, it would be a station wagon, and they see a big rig rolling past the car on the side of the road, and they think, man, I would really like to learn to control a machine like that and make a living driving that machine around the country and just seeing this country, meeting people. The problem has always been there just aren't that many of those people, particularly given the massive explosion in freight that the internet, a global super economy, has caused over the past decade or so. The driver shortage is a real ongoing issue, and there are many in the industry now who believe that autonomous vehicles can help sort of ease that problem in the future. However, as I said, I do believe there are going to be a lot of applications. Hazmat comes to mind, heavy, wide load, secure, high-value shipments that are going to require a human being on board the vehicle. But even without the human being inside the truck, it's pretty clear that even, say a tenth of the truck fleet in the country goes autonomous, we're going to have to create new occupations for humans to help these trucks operate in the wild. They're just not going to be able to do everything by themselves. And a few case in points here. First of all, you have pre- and post-trip inspections. This is obviously an FMCSA requirement. You've got to make sure your load is secure. You've got to make sure the vehicle is ready to go, checked out. And so I sort of think what we might see in an autonomous future in the very near future, we might see the return of full service station fuel attendants, which is kind of poignant for me because my first job in Tuscaloosa, Alabama was working at a kind of an Andy Griffith style service station. We may see an occupation of load inspection specialists or technicians arise. You somehow, using a cellular communication, you communicate with the truck stop, you have one of these specialists come out, go over the vehicle, perform a pre-trip, check the load, and then beam a signal back to the fleet and to the truck that truck is ready to go. You'll probably be some method to enter data into some sort of access log that law enforcement can look at, because what are we going to do when the police or the DOT or the state troopers want to pull a vehicle over? We're going to have to work out all new procedures so that an inspection officer, a state trooper, can get a vehicle to pull over. I don't think technically that's going to be a big challenge. I think the bigger challenge is going to be communicating issues found with the vehicle, and then getting someone out there in a hurry to rectify the issue so that the truck can proceed down the road. Who knows? This may be an opportunity for service providers out there, to provide a sort of a quick response roadside service to help DOT officials get trucks through inspection points, get them back on the road. And Mark, I know you have some thoughts on this topic as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Obviously, with PrePass, this is in our swim lane, and there's so much fantastic dialogue that's taking place right now. Whether it's within ATA and some of their committees or CVSA, they're working in tandem with FMCSA and really looking at what's changing and what's not. Meaning that if there's not a human being in the vehicle, is there any more assurance that that vehicle is safe and compliant? And what steps need to be taken place to make sure that that is the case? How should data transmission and what data transmission should continuously be sent along that truck's journey so that it is compliant? So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of concepts that are being considered, and this is another area where those that are tech partners in this space and the OEMs are in dire need of direction. We need to have that so that they can continue to advance their technology and again, not fall into that VHS Betamax scenario. Some of the other things that we look at in this particular space as well is making sure that the policies and the engagement are such that unintended actions or illegal actions are not taking place. If a truck was certified from point A to B and there was no opportunity for them to have a roadside inspection or to be pulled into a weigh facility, how do you validate that this truck is not being used for human trafficking or for drug smuggling or any other type of illegal activity? So I think when we look at technology, and we should be looking at all the fantastic things that it brings to us, unfortunately you have to look at the underbelly sometimes and say, let's make sure that we have checks and balances in place that don't take away from the efficiency that can without a doubt be gained with these advancements, but still to make sure that unintended activities or illicit activities are not taking place because somebody's leveraging that technology in ways that it shouldn't. The good news is we've got some great minds at the table, and they're working on these, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it. Jack?
All right, thank you, Mark. And building on that theme a little bit more in terms of law enforcement, I'm sort of stretching the envelope here, but this is an example I really like to talk about, and not in great depth, but I do like to bring it up to get people thinking about the massive changes autonomous technology could bring about to our industry. And that is to start thinking about who's going to be responsible when accidents occur. In today's world, it's, the driver, the fleet bears the responsibility for the accident in a lot of cases, assuming it wasn't the fault of the passenger car. But what happens when there's an accident when the autonomous vehicle system is in control? There's not going to be a driver to fault necessarily. Is it the software developer? Is it the OEM? Is it the fleet? So when you start thinking about this in terms of not only law enforcement, the legal aspects, the insurance aspects, it's fascinating to think about really how massive these changes could be. So, but in the meantime, obviously, we're not going to get to autonomous vehicles this year or next year. So what's happening now? And I think what we've seen over the past year, perhaps 2 years, is the OEMs and the tech startups have adopted a much more phased-in approach to autonomous technology. And what is interesting is this new approach is now sort of focused on a stair-step adoption of autonomous systems, sort of piecemeal, but there is some logic to it. But what is interesting is all of these systems are now sort of focused on the driver in terms of safety, comfort, efficiency. And I can name a few of these. We all know these. There are adaptive cruise control systems. There are smart automated manual transmissions that can learn routes and perform better each time they run the route, getting better fuel economy. There are collision warning and mitigation systems. We have blind spot detections, active steering assist are just a few examples. And I think what's really the difference between these systems, which existed obviously 5, 6, 10 years ago, the difference now is you're starting to see a lot more integration on the vehicle of these systems. They are communicating with each other. They are sharing information. They're all focused on making things safer for the driver. But, that said, as the drivers get more and more comfortable with the technology, as you and I and the public get more and more comfortable with the technology, as our lawmakers, law enforcement officials get more and more used to the idea of self-driving cars, there will be a sort of a Wright brothers moment out there where we all see an autonomous vehicle in the wild for the first time. And I say Wright brothers because I remember my grandparents could tell you exactly where they were, what they were doing the first time they ever saw an airplane in flight. And so it may very well be like that for all of us in the very near future, where one day you're going down the road and you go, hey, there's nobody behind the wheel of that truck. It's driving itself down the road. And I know, Mark, you had some thoughts on this sort of phased-in autonomous adoption program as well, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. There continues to be just great advances in the safety systems. With each new iteration, the systems continue to work smoother, more intuitively, as you said, they've been around, but they're starting to work in a systemic manner. They work, as a team now instead of standalones. And that is as they progress through the different levels of autonomy. However, one of the things that we've seen, and it kind of reflects back to the CEO from Waymo in one of your earlier comments, that increased computational power is required in order for these systems to work in a human-like manner. And that's really that key when you start to look at level 4 and 5 automation. For example, when riding in a Tesla with autopilot, it's continued to get better, but the movements associated with the lane departure system or automatic emergency braking can still be very abrupt. It works in many ways more like an on-off mode versus a smooth and calculated approach like that of a good driver. So the technologies are advancing rapidly, and as the adoption continues to increase, hopefully, the end game is, we're going to see improvements in productivity in our transportation space. But at the end, hopefully we're going to realize a downward trend in crash-related fatalities. And that's really where literally the rubber meets the road. Jack?
Thank you. So building on that, I'm often asked in my glamorous jet-setting role as a trucking journalist, what do I think will be some of the earliest examples of autonomous vehicles out there? And again, I don't think we're going to go straight to tractor trailers bombing down the highways in the middle of the night, but I do think it's going to be things like autonomous airport shuttles. Again, easy application, predictable route, very little variations in speed, directions. It's almost a perfect introductory application for autonomous vehicles. Another interesting one is autonomous refuse collection, and this is an actual Volvo autonomous truck that is undergoing trials in Europe right now. But again, repetitive routes, a little more dynamic than you might find around an airport or running to a hotel or something. But the truck basically works itself up the road as the trash crew or the refuse crew puts the barrels in the back of the truck. And I don't have a slide for it because I ran across it just yesterday, but I found a company that is doing lane painting, road paintings with autonomous technology, both tied in to the vehicle itself as it moves down the road, and with an automated boom arm that can paint the lane markings on the road and keep workers safe. So that's an interesting one. Probably the biggest initial one will be in freight distribution centers, ports, all sorts of little freight hubs. And this, again, the vehicle you see right here is a new Volvo vehicle. It's very interesting. You start to see some of the design elements of a true autonomous vehicle. You obviously don't have a need for a cab. You don't have a need for high-vac systems, air conditioning. But, these vehicles are working 24/7 in a port in Gothenburg, Sweden right now. They're autonomous vehicles, but they sort of are under human control from a centralized command system, but they have the ability to work around the clock. This is an electric truck, by the way, which is also sort of ties in with all of this. These are kind of going to be the early, predictable, somewhat safe, non-dynamic applications that I believe we will see the first autonomous vehicles in. We'll learn from those, and then I think we'll slowly start to go out into the big, broad world on the much longer stretches of road. And I think, Mark, you had some commentary here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So if we're looking at the title on this slide, today or a decade from now, I think you painted a really good picture. In terms of what we see from a futurist perspective, the trucks driving down the highway and not having drivers behind the wheel, and at that point there wouldn't need to be a wheel as far as a steering wheel. I think we're looking more at that, that decade from now. There was a research report that recently came into my email that I thought was rather interesting. It indicated that autonomous vehicles, levels 2 through 4, currently account for 3% of the market. And they're projecting that years of pilot programs are still going to be required before we see a large-scale adoption of autonomous trucks and cars. I think, as you said, we are going to phase into this. But in terms of seeing that wholesale change, there's years and years of work to be done. we've seen great technological progress. It's being made every day. And if you're following any of the phenomenal companies out there, their advancements are impressive to watch. However, I personally remain concerned that a lack of policy guidance at both the federal and state levels, if we don't get that right, it will slow progress and deployment and adoption. I spoke earlier about the FCC conundrum that's being challenged right now because you've got the House Transportation Chair DeFazio, who's sent communication to the FCC asking them to rethink their bifurcation of that very, very necessary 5.9 safety spectrum. Well, if we don't get it right, the technology will outpace our policies, and that could probably be the biggest hindrance. But I come back to, all of that being said, these are exciting times to be in the transportation industry. And like so many of those on the webinar, I can't wait to see what's next. And I think it's just a phenomenal time to see how these things are evolving and how they're going to alter our lives and alter our lives in generational change. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we're really looking. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jack. Please follow up.
I think this is going to probably be one of the biggest technological transformations that my generation will ever see. Something on par with, as I mentioned earlier, the first aircraft, go back even 100 years before that to the first locomotives. It is going to be transformational. Our purpose here with this webinar today was not to do a deep dive into autonomous technology, but to just do kind of a brief overview of what's going on, where things stand. And Mark and I agreed when we were preparing for this, what we really hope to do today was to give all of you out here watching the webinar today the opportunity to start thinking about this, because what I tell people all the time is that this technology is coming in some way, shape, or form, and it is coming sooner rather than later. And you know, initially when these trucks appeared, and I was writing about it, and people would just wave their hand and say, "Oh, that's ridiculous. It's never going to happen." And my answer to that from the beginning has always been, yes, this is going to happen. Someone out there is going to figure out how to take this technology, leverage it, and use it to make money and enhance their bottom line. And it can be you, it can be your competitor, but if you do want it to be your company, then what we hope to do today is to get you to start thinking about some of these issues, and maybe a little too soon to start planning per se at the moment. But Mark and I think, and he will probably agree with me on this 100%, it is time to start thinking about these things. And that's it. I'm going to hand this over to Mindy now. We'll do a little Q&A, and we thank you for your attention today.
Perfect. Well, thank you both, Jack and Mark. And we have had several questions come in from the audience, so we will jump right into those. And as we answer questions, please take a moment to respond to the survey form at the bottom of the screen. Your comments help us create future programs, so thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts. And this first question is one that I think everyone can relate to. With the issues related to cybersecurity, will hacking be a serious threat to autonomous vehicle use?
I think Mark will probably have a little more to say on this to me. This is the number one question I get asked, and I always joke, I think we've seen too many Terminator movies, but yeah, it is going to be a problem, and there are going to have to be safety issues, safety systems implemented to guard against that, because as we all know, there are very high value cargoes that roll around the country every single day. And as Mark said, there's always a dark underside to this, and somebody is going to attempt to hack a vehicle, make it sort of disappear off the autonomous radar screen and go to a remote location where it can be emptied of its cargo. Mark, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, cybersecurity is of paramount importance and continues to be researched. I mean, if we think about this, in terms of one of the earlier slides on how does this impact drivers and why would we still have drivers in these vehicles for the foreseeable future, we've seen bad actions from drivers with non-autonomous trucks using them as weapons, weaponizing trucks, an 80,000-pound vehicle going down whether it's a street or a highway. Imagine the destruction that could be done from a cybersecurity perspective. So I think that's where, when we see these things advancing, and until we as members of the community are comfortable that they're adequately addressed and locked down, that having somebody in the vehicle that can override systems to deal with those types of issues is of paramount importance. And, I come back to, and it's a common example. We've had autopilot in aircraft for decades, and that autopilot is used for in excess of 90% of the flight time. However, we still, for commercial flights, have pilot and a co-pilot. And I think that you follow that similar analogy, you have somebody there who can respond in the event that something goes wrong. And so cybersecurity is going to be important. It needs to be addressed. I know that the folks out there are working on it. It's a topic that we see come up all the time, whether it's at ATA, CVSA, or ITS America, and it's going to run in parallel. But I think that's where we are going to continue to see human engagement in the vehicles.
Okay, very good. And this question is also interesting. It relates to the data that the trucks are going to need to operate. And this person commented, it took Google Maps 4 hours to recognize the bridge collapse in Atlanta. What's being done to improve road condition reporting?
I think this is in Mark's wheelhouse. I'll just say this. This is a great example of the kind of changes, systemic changes, that will have to go throughout all aspects of our society as we prepare for autonomous vehicles, because clearly, there's going to have to be some sort of fast response team with entities like GPS, Google Maps. But I'll sort of throw the football over to Mark here on this one.
Oh, heck, I'll throw my first response out, which is not enough. But I think that's an obvious one. For those of you that are following politics, obviously an infrastructure bill is being talked about greatly at this point in time. And I think it's no mystery to anybody that we don't have the funding necessary to maintain our roads, let alone to have our states and cities and municipalities have the appropriate resources for their traffic management centers so that they work in a cohesive system. There's progress that is being made from our perspective with different alerts that we have within our program, working with third-party vendors as well as alerts that we use ourselves. But right now it's trying to pull things in and aggregate them and in order to get a centralized hub. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and resources are necessary. So hopefully through whatever this infrastructure funding bill looks like, that will be one of the priorities that helps to improve our infrastructure and then also the timely reporting of those conditions.
Okay, and we have gotten several questions about drivers. This question is, while the implications of this technology are exciting, how do we embrace these advancements while still utilizing the unique skill sets that our drivers possess? Do you see control centers being run by those with experience in the trenches, so to speak?
I do, and I've spoken about this on several radio broadcasts I've done on the Road Dog Trucking Network, among other things. I do. I kind of envision a sort of a NASA-type control room in fleet headquarters, and I think this will be one way that fleets will have to sort of adjust their internal workforces to deal with autonomous technology. But yeah, I think you will have transportation specialists who get to go home every night and get to go to their kids' baseball games, who do sort of monitor a set number of vehicles, deal with emergencies, probably interact with law enforcement, as we mentioned during the slideshow, make sure the trucks are getting pre-tripped or are in good shape maintenance-wise. I do think this will be a new occupation that will arise because of these vehicles. Mark, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Jack. I think there's a natural evolution in the technology, and again, simply drawing parallels back to the drones that the military uses and how that program has evolved. So I don't think it is unique territory. I think there are parallels that are out there that can be adapted and integrated over time. So I would agree with you on that.
And this question relates to compliance. It says, in order for technology to perform any task, it has to have a human interaction of some kind, which you're just touching on. But how is it possible for an autonomous vehicle to be as compliant as a truck driven by a human?
I'm not sure I understand the question in terms of compliant. I mean, obviously they're not going to let the trucks on the road unless they feel it is as safe or safer than a human driver. But in terms of compliance, I guess in terms of regulation, weight, and all those sorts of things, I suppose that's what the question is about. Yeah, we're going to have to develop an infrastructure to support these vehicles, to make sure they're not too heavy, as Mark said, to make sure that it's not being used for drugs or human trafficking, to make sure it's been inspected before a trip, after a trip, to make sure the cargo is properly tied down. And we don't have those systems in place right now, and it does appear that we're going to have to sort of develop them from scratch. So, yes, again, another set of new occupations that are going to have to arise as these vehicles become more commonplace, in my opinion. Mark, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think, again, there's always going to be human involvement. So as we've talked about, are there, some of the concepts being discussed, is there an enhanced pre-trip inspection by somebody who's been certified in accordance with maybe a CVSA or FMCSA type of program? So there's obviously front-end compliance that can be looked at. Then there's also, when we look at the V2I slides that we talked about earlier, is communication from that commercial vehicle as it's progressing in its route. And those certain data streams need to be identified and how that's being communicated. But when we look at it, one would still think that some of the concerns with a driver or without a driver still exist. If there's a hard stop for whatever reason, and keeping in mind that as these technologies advance, they're still going to be sharing the roads for several years with non-autonomous and non-connected vehicles based on a phase-in. So if there's a hard stop and the load shifts in the trailer and that throws the axle weights off on that truck, well, again, those are things that today create non-compliant conditions that are caught with weigh and motion scales, or a truck pulling over a static scale at a weigh station. And the driver ideally is given the opportunity to move the load so it's back in a compliant status. So those are things that I think will still have to be looked at. If the truck is fully autonomous and there's no driver present and that non-compliant condition is identified, what is that procedure for remedying that condition? Where can the truck be pulled over? Who's going to address the issue? And obviously from a shipper's perspective, they have SLAs with their carriers and they want to make sure that the loads are showing up on time and there's not an out-of-service order. That's a whole other question. What's the criteria for an out-of-service order on an autonomous vehicle? So the field is vast and there's lots of components that need to be addressed before this game is over, that is for sure.
That's actually a great segue into our next question, and our audience member says, I'm interested in brainstorming possible positions that may be created by autonomous trucks and preparing for them. I'd like to see truckers prepare for the transition. Where can we get further information? Do either of you have ideas on how folks can brainstorm and think through what these new positions might be?
Well, I'll pitch this one to Mark pretty quickly. I think we're really at the dawn of this age, and I think, again, that as far as Mark and I were concerned when we were sort of hashing this out, these are the kind of conversations we would like to start. These are the kind of things we would like to see people in the industry to begin thinking about. We are just starting to really consider how transformative, how sweeping the changes. Again, just 10, 20% of the trucks on the road being under autonomous control will be for our society, our industry, our economy. So as far as I know, there's nowhere we can get further information. But Mark, you might have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would. As I had mentioned before, there are two active and standing committees, both with CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, and then also with American Trucking Associations. And although the direct questions may not be answered, these committees have been convened for the purposes of addressing those exact type of questions. What are the resources that are needed? Start thinking through those now. What kind of training is necessary? I will tell you that one of the folks in the autonomous truck space who has a testing center in Tucson, and they've actually worked with the local community college system to start developing coursework, which I thought was fantastic. And so those type of conversations are taking place, but I would certainly start with CVSA and ATA and go forward from there.
Okay, very good. Jack, do we have any idea on how these vehicles will be fueled if there's not a driver? And what type of fuel will these trucks use, or are they electric?
They're going to be diesel. Well, they're going to be both diesel and electric, according to Elon Musk, and they may very well be powered by hydrogen fuel cells as well. Now, as I mentioned in the slideshow, fueling is going to be a problem, especially if there's not a driver on board. And so, again, I think we will see the return of the gas pump jockeys, like I did when I was a kid in high school and college, who will probably be trained. I don't think they'll wash the windshields. There won't be any need for that, but they'll certainly probably check the air pressure in the tires. They'll check the DEF fluid. They'll fuel the trucks. Just perform very basic high-level maintenance checks on them and get them back out on the road. Electric is a little more problematic because, again, you have much longer recharge times for the batteries. And so you might see some sort of recharging hubs, or there's been some talk about modular battery packs that could be changed out quickly by a crew of human technicians. The truck comes in, you take the depleted battery off the vehicle, it rolls away to get charged up, you snap another one, for lack of a better term, in place, and the truck gets back out on the road. But again, there is always, as Mark said, there's simply no way these trucks are ever going to be able to operate completely alone without any human interaction, at least as long as any of us are around. Mark?
Yeah, Jack, one thing, and it's a little off topic, but I do want to share it with our participants today, and that is, sometimes we conflate the issues and assume that autonomous and connected automatically means electric, which it doesn't. As you said, there's going to be a period of time where there's electric, there's hybrid, hydrogen, and fossil fuel. But one of the things that I've been seeing and hearing a lot of is for those fleets that are contemplating electric, regardless of whether it has autonomous or connected technologies, that now is the time to really start looking at that because of the limited capacity of the grid. And if you're in a shared warehouse facility, for example, and somebody else there already makes the decision and they've already had the infrastructure pulled in, there may not be enough capacity in the grid that services that building for somebody else to install their own charging stations. So again, just a bit of a side note, but I thought I would bring it up because when we talk about is it today or is it a decade from now, there's a lot of things that need to be contemplated and planned for, and hopefully we're providing some useful tidbits that might help folks to find that direction.
Okay, great. I think there's definitely been a lot of great information out there already to get people thinking. Let's jump into this question. What part do you think truck platooning will play in the scale up to fully autonomous trucks?
That's a great question. I authored a report with the North American Council for Freight Efficiency back in 2016 on truck platooning, and at the time we felt strongly that at least 2 truck platooning for fuel economy purposes would be quite possibly the first, in the wild moment where people saw autonomous trucks in action, or at least level 4 autonomous with drivers on board. Since then, platooning seems to have gone over to the back burner. It doesn't seem to be quite as prominent an early technology as we initially thought. And our thinking at the moment at NAFC is that the autonomous technology in general has moved so quickly over the past 5 years that we think it sort of overtook and bypassed platooning. And so we think that at some point, as the vehicles get more and more capable of taking themselves up and down the road, we think platooning will just kind of be a subset of full autonomous operation. That, in other words, two autonomous trucks are going down the road, they are communicating with each other, they understand that they're both going to, say, Albuquerque or near Albuquerque. They'll just lock in tight in a convoy-type formation without any real command or control. It'll just be a sort of a default operating mode for the vehicles when the conditions are right. That's our take at the moment. Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one, but if you do.
Now, my thoughts are well said. I'll leave it at that.
And that actually leads into this as well. Will autonomous vehicles be used for local freight transportation or for over-the-road freight transportation? Do you have thoughts on where we're going to see these in use?
Yeah, it's going to be all of the above. I think you'll see autonomous robots about the size of a beer cooler or a drink cooler roaming around, delivering pizzas. You'll see them deliver. I've envisioned a world where, a driver pulls into a truck stop in the truck cab of the future, near future. He's got autonomous control systems on the vehicle. He might be able to use the wall of his sleeper as sort of an interactive computer screen. He's got a fever. He needs to get a virtual doctor. He's diagnosed with strep throat. Prescription is called into a pharmacy in the truck stop, and a little autonomous robot, kind of like the ones on Star Wars that Chewbacca scares away in the Death Star, trundles up. He punches in a code on it. He gets his prescription medicine. So, yeah, that's I think important to really start to think about this. I think you'll see autonomous vehicles, like I said, little small robots that deliver very small parcels. You'll see airport shuttles. And then I think you'll start to see it probably long-haul applications first. Those seem, from talking to the tech developers, seem to be the easiest to manage. There's not a lot of traffic on remote stretches of interstate out in the Southwest. But again, over time, yeah, I think as the technology gets better, more refined, more safe, I think it will slowly but surely kind of matriculate down into pretty much every trucking application you can imagine. Mark?
Yeah, and definitely have a few tidbits to add on this one. We are already seeing some of the companies who are doing some really good work on the highway. And then we see some who are taking kind of the concept of literally mapping out their routes as if they're virtual train tracks from point A to point B, from maybe one distribution center to another. So we're seeing that activity today, and again, phenomenal results. But I will tell you, I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with several state DOT directors, and here's conversations that are taking place today, Jack, relative to the use of robots for delivery. States are already contemplating policies that says how big can they be, where can they travel, and how fast can they travel, and regulatory action that says how do we hold humans accountable if they are disruptive or destroying said robots because they're mad that they're sharing their sidewalk. Those conversations are taking place today. They're real, it's out there, and we will start to see those things happening. And that also elevates in terms of the utilization of drones and where they can fly, where they can't fly, what the decibels are going to be. Somebody said, who wants to see 15 drones flying over their backyard on a Saturday when you're trying to, have a barbecue with your friends and family? So there's a lot of that stuff, folks, that is taking place as we speak.
Great. Well, we are nearing the end of our time, but I want to squeeze in this one last question because I think it's such a good one. So can you tell us quickly, why are OEMs and startups pushing autonomous technology? Are there really that many significant gains in productivity to be made with autonomous vehicle systems? Jack, do you want to start?
Yes, and I would say, again, it goes back to, as I mentioned in the presentation, the driver shortage. There's a huge demand for drivers. There just aren't that many out there. A diplomatic way to say this is a lot of the drivers out there don't want to be truck drivers. They are doing it as a job of last resort. They can't find any other work. They might be much happier, as I said, in sort of that NASA-type control room, managing various logistic vehicles as they travel around. And then again, the one I would say the big one to me is, again, imagine what I said about all those communication systems, infrastructure, everything coordinated, working together, integrated in ways that expedite traffic flow through major cities. You're doing away with stop and start traffic, congestion, confusion, even accidents. You know, a lot of the autonomous development OEMs and startup techs say, you know, you could possibly make traffic accidents, if not a thing of the past, exceedingly rare in operating conditions like that. So yes, there are massive, massive operational efficiency gains to be made with this technology. If you look at the money going into this, you know, there's a startup in the Southwest, I believe Mark referenced a while ago. They're what's called a Wall Street unicorn. They got $1 billion in fundraising from outside investors when they put their technology out there. And that's just one of these companies. The money that is flowing into the OEMs and the tech startups alike is staggering to contemplate. And people just don't put that kind of money into technology that's, the term I use is a party trick. Oh, look what we can do. We can make this truck drive itself up the road. There are very real efficiency gains, operational gains, safety gains to be made when this technology comes to fruition, and that is why you're seeing these massive pushes in the technology, the funding, all aspects of this. Mark, over to you.
So, Jack, I'll speak from the safety perspective, and again, everything you said is spot on. But if we pull back from an optics perspective and not look at it just from trucks, but look at it from passenger vehicles, and the data that sits out there often puts the fault of the accident north of 80% on the driver. And when we look at any of us who's sharing the highways, driving to and from work, I know that's a rarity nowadays, but for those that still do, the distracted driving. And we look at the amount of things that people are trying to multitask in their vehicles. So if there's a way to automate these functions and take that out of the hands of the drivers, and again, not commercial drivers, but just everybody who's using the roadways, if there's a path forward to make that a safer process and to save lives, you know, we look at, depending upon the year, and unfortunately last year was not great, you know, you're north of 37,000 fatalities per year. If there's a way to use technology to reduce those, you know, and often in the Department of Transportations around the country, the goal is towards zero death. And so the commercial component is there. It's always going to be there. But if we can marry that from a safety perspective and save lives, how fantastic is that? You know, and again, we look at this and say, well, okay, 38,000 lives. That's equal to a commercial airliner falling out of the sky and killing all passengers every single day of the year. But because it happens in a one-by-one environment, we as society don't see it that way. But when you aggregate those numbers, it's astounding. So I think the safety component continues to drive this and will yield phenomenal results.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch how this plays out over the next several years. We had several questions we couldn't get to, but we can follow up with you directly after the webinar. I wanted to say thank you so much to both of you for being here. This does conclude our hour together. Today's webcast will be available online at no charge for 1 year, and you can find it on the Fleet Owner website. Thank you again, Jack and Mark, for sharing your expertise, and thank you to PrePass Safety Alliance for sponsoring this event. Thank you to our viewers for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us again for another Fleet Owner webcast. Goodbye.